Ray never got to finish his coffee. Kurt found him in the truck, parked outside the yard where they'd unloaded lumber together every morning for 31 years. Still warm. Radio still on. For 3 full seconds, Kurt thought his brother was just resting his eyes. He didn't know it yet, standing there, but the business the two of them built with nothing but a borrowed truck and their father's old tools had just quietly stopped belonging to only him. Nobody had ever written down what was supposed to happen next. Think about the people you've built something with, on nothing but a handshake and enough years to make paperwork feel insulting. Now imagine one of you gone, on an ordinary Tuesday, before either of you ever got around to it. Ray and Kurt started the landscaping company in their 20s, 50-50, sealed with nothing more than their father telling them, "You're brothers, you don't need a contract for that." 31 years of trucks and handshake deals. Here's the truth almost no family business ever hears until it's too late to use it. Most companies with more than one owner never put a single word of succession planning in writing. Nobody plans for the gap. Everybody just quietly hopes nobody ever has to find it. For 31 years, he was right anyway. Until the exact week he wasn't. 3 weeks after the funeral, Kurt sat across from an attorney he'd never met, next to Ray's widow, Deb, a woman he'd loved like a sister for 2 decades, both of them holding coffee, neither one was drinking. "There's no operating agreement," the attorney said. "No buy-sell. Ray's half of the company passes directly into his estate. Which means, legally, it's yours now, Deb. Half of everything Kurt built with your husband." She let that sit a second before she kept going, gentler now. A lot of families never hear this until it's exactly this late. A buy-sell agreement, funded with a simple life insurance policy on each partner, would have turned this into a phone call instead of a lawsuit waiting to happen. It's one of the most basic tools in business planning. Almost nobody actually sets it up. Kurt stared at the word estate like it belonged to someone else's brother. A company built on trust doesn't come with a legal definition of trust attached to it. The law doesn't read minds. It reads paperwork, and there wasn't any. State default law simply treats a deceased partner's share like any other inherited asset, passed straight to whoever legally inherits it, whether or not that person ever swept a floor there. Deb didn't ask for it. That's the part worth sitting with. She never once said the word buyout before that attorney did. But she had 2 kids finishing college, a mortgage Ray's income used to cover, and a life insurance policy that had lapsed for years earlier when money got tight and nobody thought to mention it. She needed the money. Not out of greed. Out of arithmetic. Ask yourself honestly, if you were Deb, raising 2 kids alone, staring at half ownership of a business you never worked a single day in, what would you actually do with it? This was never really just one landscaping company. Swap business for house, retirement account, or family savings, and the same trapdoor sits underneath any family that ever assumed love alone would settle a question only a document can actually answer. The appraisal came back at just under $900,000, a number that took the appraiser 11 pages to justify and Kurt about 4 seconds to feel like a wrecking ball. Kurt's half of that number, sitting in his own bank account, about $60,000. He did the math 3 different ways that week, hoping one of them would come out differently. Selling the house wouldn't close the gap, not even close, not after the mortgage still on it. The bank turned him down for a loan against the business itself, citing cash flow too thin to service that much new debt on top of payroll. Liquidating the equipment, the trucks, the mowers, the trailers that kept 40 accounts running every week, would have covered maybe a third of what he needed, and ended the business in the process of trying to save it. There was no version of the math that worked. That's the part that should genuinely scare you, watching this. Kurt wasn't careless with money. He simply never had a document that turned an impossible number into a plannable one. The attorney's words came back to him that week, the ones he'd barely registered in the fog of that first meeting. A payout instead of a lawsuit. A signature instead of a grief-stricken negotiation with a deadline attached. He hadn't been ready to hear it 3 weeks ago. He was ready now, exactly one appraisal too late. Nobody wants to plan for their brother's funeral while he's still alive to hear about it. The business started slipping while Kurt was still doing that math. 2 vendors who'd extended 30-day credit for a decade started asking for payment up front, word having quietly traveled about some kind of ownership trouble at the company. A long-time customer called to ask, carefully, whether the crew would still be showing up next season. Not every call that week went that way. Roy Delgado, who'd run one of Ray's crews for 19 years, showed up at 6 the next Monday like nothing had changed, and told Kurt flatly he'd take a pay cut before he'd watch the company go under. Kurt didn't have words for that. He just nodded, and both of them got back to work, because some loyalty doesn't need a sentence to prove itself. He was alone in the shop past midnight later that same week, going through old invoices for the appraiser, when he found Ray's reading glasses on the shelf above the workbench, exactly where his brother always left them. Kurt picked them up without thinking, and something in him finally gave out that had been holding since the truck. He hadn't cried at the funeral. He'd been too busy being the strong one, shaking hands, thanking people for casseroles he never ate. He cried now, alone, at 11:40 at night, holding a pair of reading glasses that would never get worn again, in a building he might not get to keep. Nobody saw it. That was almost the whole point of it happening at all. Kurt started missing calls from Deb after that. Not out of anger. Out of dread, the specific dread of a conversation neither of them knew how to survive without losing something. His nephew, Ray's son Tyler, stopped coming by the yard on weekends the way he used to, sensing something wrong in the air without anyone explaining it to him directly. He'd worked summers there since he was 14, learned to run the skid steer from his father's own hands. Now he texted instead of showing up, short messages that said nothing about the actual thing on everyone's mind. The real bill never showed up on the appraisal at all. It showed up as a business quietly losing the trust of the people around it, and a family quietly rearranging itself around a silence nobody chose on purpose, one skipped Sunday at a time. There was a second question Kurt couldn't say out loud to anyone, not even Deb. If he lost half the company, who was he, exactly, without it? He'd never once been Kurt without also being Ray and Kurt's. 31 years, and he'd never had to answer that question alone. Kurt finally drove to Deb's house on a Sunday, unannounced, the way he used to when Ray was alive and Sundays meant something easier. "I'm not trying to take the business from you," Deb said, before he even sat down. "I need you to know that. I just don't know how else to pay for Emily's last semester." "I know," Kurt said. "I've known since the attorney's office. I just didn't know how to say it back to you without it sounding like I was choosing the business over you." Neither of them had a villain to point at. Just 2 people, both right, both scared, standing on opposite sides of a number neither of them had asked to be handed. They didn't solve it that day. But they finally said the real sentence out loud instead of avoiding each other's calls. "We both loved him, and we both need something the business can't give us both at once." So what actually protects a family like this one, whether or not there's a business involved at all? Here's the uncomfortable part: the fix was never complicated. It just required someone willing to say the hard sentence first. It starts with treating a written agreement the way you'd treat a smoke detector, not because you expect a fire, but because you don't get to choose which ordinary Tuesday becomes the one that needed it. Whether it's a buy-sell agreement, a clear will, or simply naming beneficiaries correctly, The principle is identical: decide the plan while it's still hypothetical, so nobody has to negotiate it while they're grieving. It continues with naming the uncomfortable scenario directly, once, early, instead of trusting love to cover a gap only a document can actually close. Not because you don't trust the people you love. Because trust was never the thing missing. A plan was. Kurt and Deb eventually settled it, slower and smaller than either of them wanted, a structured payout over 6 years instead of one impossible lump sum, the business surviving on thinner margins than it used to carry. The vendors came back once word got out there was a plan in place. Tyler started coming by the yard again that spring, tentatively at first, then like nothing had ever paused. He kept Ray's coffee mug on the shelf in the office, the one from that last ordinary Tuesday, right next to where the reading glasses used to sit before Kurt finally brought them home. Doesn't drink from it. Just leaves it there, where he can see it while he works. Ray never got to finish that coffee. Kurt has never once tried to finish it for him. Some things aren't meant to be completed. They're meant to be kept exactly where they were left, as a small daily reminder of what 31 years of trust could build, and exactly what it couldn't, on its own, protect. Here's the sentence worth carrying out of this video: 2 brothers spent 31 years building something on trust, and trust turned out to be exactly strong enough to build it, and exactly powerless to protect it once one of them was gone. Love was never the missing piece. Somebody just had to write it down.